The restaurant on Fifth Street didn't advertise itself as exclusive, but everything about it suggested you were expected to know better than to walk in by accident. The windows were tall and clean, the lighting warm but restrained. Conversations stayed low, as if the walls themselves had learned discretion over the years. Tuesday nights were predictable. Predictability was the point. Daniel Cross arrived at exactly 7:12, every Tuesday, rain or shine. The host never asked how many were in his party. She simply nodded and reached for the single menu already waiting at the corner table by the window. Daniel acknowledged her with the smallest tilt of his head, neither rude nor friendly. Efficient. Controlled. He liked that table because it faced the street. He could watch headlights slide past the glass, watch people hurry by with places to be and people to meet. It reminded him that the world kept moving without requiring anything from him. He removed his coat, folded it once, and placed it on the chair beside him. He sat straight, shoulders squared, posture unyielding. The suit he wore was dark, tailored, unremarkable in the way expensive things often were. No one looking at him would guess how much money sat quietly behind his name. That was intentional. Daniel ordered the same meal every week. Grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, sparkling water with a slice of lemon he never squeezed. He didn't look at his phone while he waited. He didn't pretend to be busy. He simply sat, hands folded loosely, eyes occasionally drifting to the window. The staff knew him as the quiet one, the generous tipper, the man who never lingered after paying. Some of them knew more. They whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. They always underestimated him. Tonight felt no different. The restaurant filled slowly. A couple celebrating an anniversary took the table near the bar. A group of co-workers laughed too loudly near the center of the room. The clink of glasses blended with the soft hum of background music that no one actively listened to. Daniel took it all in without reacting. His food arrived exactly 7 minutes after he ordered. He thanked the server, a young man who smiled too eagerly, and began eating at a measured pace. Every bite deliberate. Every movement economical. He was halfway through his meal when he noticed her. She wasn't assigned to his table. He knew that because he always noticed who was. It wasn't curiosity. It was habit. Years of meetings, negotiations, watching people to see what they wanted before they asked for it. She moved carefully through the narrow spaces between tables, balancing plates on one arm, her steps controlled but not stiff. She wore the same uniform as the others, black slacks and a pressed shirt, but something about her pace made him look twice. Then he saw it. The slight delay in her stride. The way her weight shifted just a fraction of a second slower than it should have. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just enough to register if you were paying attention. Someone at a nearby table pushed their chair back without looking. The leg scraped against the floor, cutting into her path. She adjusted instinctively, her body compensating before her face did. Her jaw tightened. She inhaled once, steadying herself. Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. She recovered quickly. Most people wouldn't have noticed anything at all. She kept moving, eyes forward, expression neutral. But Daniel watched her until she disappeared into the kitchen. He didn't know why he kept thinking about it. The rest of his meal passed uneventfully, but his attention drifted more than usual. When she re-emerged, he found himself tracking her again. The way she avoided sudden turns. The way she leaned briefly against the service station when she thought no one was looking. He didn't feel pity. That wasn't what it was. It felt closer to recognition. When he finished eating, he folded his napkin and set it beside the plate. He waited, as he always did, for the check to arrive without having to ask. That was when she stopped near his table. She pretended to wipe down the edge of an empty chair, though it was already clean. Up close, he could see the faint sheen of sweat at her temple, the controlled set of her shoulders. Her name badge caught the light as she shifted. She hesitated. Daniel looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the restaurant seemed to recede, leaving only the space between them. He met her eyes. They were dark, steady, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand tightened slightly around the cloth she was holding. Finally she spoke. "Sir," she said, her voice careful but not apologetic. Can I sit with you for a minute?" The question hung in the air, fragile and unexpected. Daniel didn't answer right away. If you're enjoying this story so far, this is one of those moments where things quietly begin to shift. You might want to stay with it, and if stories like this are your kind of thing, subscribing now means you won't miss what comes next. Daniel glanced at the empty chair across from him, then back at her. His response would be simple. Just one word. And it would change the rhythm of his Tuesdays in ways he couldn't yet see. By the time Talia Brooks clocked in for her shift, her leg was already reminding her that the day had started too early. She stood in the narrow employee hallway, one hand braced against the cool painted wall, the other adjusting the strap at her thigh. The prosthetic clicked softly as she shifted her weight, a sound she'd learned to tune out but never fully forget. It wasn't pain exactly. More like a constant negotiation between what her body wanted and what the world demanded. "Everything good?" a coworker asked in passing. "Yeah," Talia said automatically. "All good." It was easier that way. The restaurant had its own rhythm, one she'd memorized over months of working there. The floor creaked slightly near the bar. Table 6 wobbled if someone leaned too hard on the edge. The air always felt warmer near the kitchen doors, thick with butter and garlic and the faint burn of something grilled a little too long. She liked knowing these things. Predictability helped. Predictability meant fewer surprises, fewer moments where she'd have to recover in front of people who pretended not to stare. Talia hadn't always worked here. Before the accident, she'd waited tables at a diner off the interstate, the kind of place truckers stopped at for coffee refills and silence. Afterward, she'd spent nearly a year in physical therapy, learning how to stand again, how to walk without thinking about it every second. This job was supposed to be temporary. A stepping stone. That's what she told herself when she first tied on the apron. But temporary had a way of stretching. By 6:30, the dinner crowd had begun to trickle in. Talia moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates, refilling water glasses, smiling just enough to be polite without inviting conversation. She didn't rush. Rushing was how mistakes happened. She noticed him when he walked in, though she didn't know why. He came every Tuesday. Everyone knew that. He never caused trouble. Never sent food back. Never lingered. If she was being honest, he was the kind of customer most servers preferred. Alone. Quiet. Predictable. Still, something about him pulled her attention without permission. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, as if the room bent slightly around him. Or the way he seemed fully present and entirely distant at the same time. She wasn't assigned to his table, but she saw him sit in the corner by the window. Same as always. Coat folded. Back straight. Eyes scanning the room briefly before settling on the street outside. Talia pushed the thought aside and focused on her section. An hour into the shift, her leg began to ache more sharply. She felt it in the joint, a dull pressure that radiated upward. She adjusted her stance whenever she could, leaning subtly against counters, pausing for half a breath longer than necessary when setting plates down. Near his table, a group of coworkers laughed loudly, one of them sliding a chair back without looking. The chair clipped into Talia's path just as she passed. She adjusted on instinct, shifting her weight, catching herself before anything obvious happened. Her heart thudded once hard, then settled. She kept moving, face calm, hands steady. It wasn't until she reached the service station that she realized her fingers were trembling slightly. She took a slow breath. In through her nose. Out through her mouth. When she glanced back toward the corner table, she caught his eyes on her. He wasn't staring. It wasn't intrusive. It was simply attentive. That unsettled her more than pity ever had. Most people either ignored her completely or overcorrected, rushing to open doors she hadn't asked for. He did neither. He just watched as if filing something away. She broke eye contact first and turned back to her work. Later, as the rush died down, the ache in her leg deepened. The restaurant settled into that quiet lull where the air felt heavier and time slowed. Talia wiped down counters that didn't need wiping, more for the excuse to pause than anything else. Her manager was busy in the back. No one was watching. She found herself standing near the corner table again, closer this time. She could hear the soft scrape of his fork against the plate, the controlled rhythm of someone who never ate in a hurry. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up. She shifted her weight and leaned lightly against the empty chair across from him, just to take the pressure off her leg. Just for a second. That was when she realized she didn't want to move. Not because of him exactly, but because sitting felt like relief, like permission. She knew the rules. She knew how this looked. Her pulse picked up anyway. She straightened, heart beating faster now, and turned toward him. The words formed before doubt could stop them. "Sir," she said. He looked up. The moment stretched, fragile and charged, and Talia understood she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't easily step back from. She swallowed. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" Even as she asked, part of her braced for the answer she expected, and for the consequences that might follow. The moment after she asked felt longer than it actually was. Talia stood there, suddenly aware of every detail of herself. The faint tremor in her leg. The way her fingers tightened around the cloth. The quiet awareness that she had crossed an invisible line and couldn't uncross it. Daniel Cross looked up at her. He didn't react right away. His expression didn't change. He simply studied her the way he studied everything else, carefully, without haste. His eyes moved from her face to the empty chair across from him, then back again. "No," he said. The word landed softly, but it still landed. Heat crept up Talia's neck. She nodded once, already preparing to apologize, already shifting her weight to move away. "I'm sorry," she began. "I shouldn't have." "You can," he added. She froze. Daniel reached out and pulled the chair back with a slow, deliberate motion. The wood scraped lightly against the floor, a sound that felt louder than it should have. "If you're not expecting a miracle," he said. For a heartbeat, Talia wondered if she'd misheard him. Then she looked at the chair. At the space he had opened. At his face, still neutral, still guarded, but no longer closed. She sat. The chair was firmer than it looked. As soon as she lowered herself into it, relief spread through her leg, immediate and almost dizzying. She exhaled without realizing she'd been holding her breath. "I won't stay long," she said quickly. "I just needed to get off my feet for a second." "You should take your breaks," Daniel replied. "It's not a favor." She let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "That's not how it works here." He tilted his head slightly as if considering that. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward silence. Just unfilled space. Up close he looked different than she'd expected. Older than she'd first thought, but not tired. There was something contained about him, like a man who kept his emotions locked behind glass. His hands rested calmly on the table, fingers relaxed, no restless tapping. "You come here every week," Talia said before she could stop herself. "I do. Same day. Same time." "Yes." She winced. "Sorry? That probably sounded strange." "It's observant," he said. "Most people don't notice." "I notice a lot," she replied. "It's kind of part of the job." His mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile. More like an acknowledgement. "I'm Daniel," he said after a pause. "Talia," she replied. "Nice to meet you." "Likewise." Another pause followed. The restaurant hummed quietly around them, dishes clinking in the background, a muted laugh from the bar, the soft hiss of the kitchen doors opening and closing. "So," Daniel said, "what made you ask?" She hesitated. Honesty felt riskier than silence. "My leg," she said finally. "It was acting up." He glanced down again, not staring, not lingering. Just a brief acknowledgement before returning his gaze to her face. "That happens," he said simply. She nodded, surprised by how much that small, uncomplicated response meant. They talked about nothing important after that. The weather. The way the restaurant's lighting made everything look warmer than it actually was. The fact that Tuesdays were always quieter than expected. "You like that?" she asked when she noticed he hadn't touched his phone once. "I do," he said. "Quiet makes it easier to think." "What do you think about?" He considered the question longer than she expected. "Things I didn't say when I should have." That made her look at him differently. She checked the room instinctively, making sure no one was watching too closely. Her manager was still busy. No one seemed to notice them. "I should get back," she said reluctantly, shifting in her chair. "You can stay another minute," Daniel said. "If you want." She stayed. When she finally stood, adjusting her balance carefully, he said, "Thank you for the company." She smiled, genuine this time. "Thank you for the chair." As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her back. Not heavy, not intrusive. Just present. She told herself it was nothing. Just a brief break. Just a moment of kindness between strangers. But when she glanced back once more and saw him still watching the street, the empty chair across from him pushed slightly out, she had the sudden, unsettling sense that something had quietly shifted. And that next Tuesday might not feel the same at all. Talia returned the following Tuesday with the same routine she always carried. Tight bun, polished shoes, apron pressed, prosthetic leg adjusted just so. She told herself she was there to work, to make the hours pass, to collect tips and survive another shift. She didn't expect to think about Daniel Cross before she even clocked in. But she did. By 7, he was already at the corner table, coat folded neatly over the chair beside him, the faint gleam of his watch catching the soft restaurant light. He glanced up when she approached, eyes calm, deliberate. That same steady gaze that felt almost unsettling in its focus. "Good evening, sir," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Good evening," he replied, returning her acknowledgement with the same measured tilt of his head. For a moment they both paused, as if caught in the same unspoken question. Would the previous week's awkward invitation and her sudden presence here repeat itself or fade into ordinary routine? Talia's hands tightened around the order pad. Then she remembered something. Something about the way he had offered her the chair last week. Something about the absence of judgment in his face, the calm, almost invisible way he had let her be. The thought made her take a small risk, one she wouldn't have allowed herself otherwise. "May I sit with you again?" she asked, her words softer this time, less tentative. He looked up. The corner of his mouth tugged ever so slightly. "I assumed you would." Relief and nervous anticipation surged through her. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, adjusting her prosthetic so it wouldn't catch. The moment felt natural, though Talia knew the world around them didn't always operate on natural moments. "Coffee?" he asked after a pause. "Yes, please," she replied. "Black like yours." They sat in the quiet hum of the restaurant. This week, the room seemed more alive somehow. The faint hiss of the espresso machine, the scrape of chairs from other tables, the muted laughter in the bar, but none of it intruded on the fragile space between them. "So," Daniel began, "how was your week?" Talia hesitated. The question sounded simple, but it wasn't. It was loaded, the kind of polite opening that could mean anything. "Busy?" she said finally. "Lots of shifts. You know how it goes." He nodded. "I do." They lapsed into silence, not uncomfortable, just observant. Daniel ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite. Talia took the same care when she sipped her coffee. Neither rushed. Neither expected the other to fill the void with chatter. After a few moments, she dared to ask something she'd been thinking about. "Why do you come here every Tuesday?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window for a long moment, watching headlights streak past the glass. "Because it's predictable," he said finally. The world outside rarely offers that. Talia nodded, understanding more than she expected. I think I get that, she said quietly. I spend a lot of my life adjusting to unpredictability. He tilted his head, studying her as if reading a line she hadn't meant to reveal. And yet here you are, sitting with me. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to say something clever or meaningful but only managed. Sometimes you have to risk a little unpredictability. He allowed the statement to linger. No response. Not immediately. But the corner of his mouth shifted ever so slightly, almost a smirk. A silent acknowledgement of her courage. The sound of a chair scraping from another table startled them both. Talia laughed softly, a light, unexpected sound that felt out of place in her usual composed demeanor. You laugh a lot less than you should, Daniel said after a pause. I've been told that, she replied, smiling. Another pause stretched between them, this one heavier. Talia could feel her heart beating in her chest. She didn't want to leave this quiet, contained space. And yet she knew the rules, she had to. When she finally rose, Daniel's gaze followed her. I'll see you next week, he said. She paused in the aisle, considering whether to risk one last word. I'll be here, she replied, and this time her voice carried a note of certainty. As she returned to her section, she felt his eyes on her back. The sensation wasn't oppressive. It was steady, observant, intimate in a way she wasn't used to. And in that moment, Talia realized that the simple act of sitting, of sharing space with him, had begun to shift something neither of them fully understood yet. Outside, the night continued as usual, the city unaware that two lives had quietly collided, setting in motion a rhythm neither could ignore. She straightened her apron, took a slow breath, and wondered silently what the next Tuesday would bring. But before she could ponder too long, a faint sound, a muffled laugh, the scrape of a chair, hinted that the quiet comfort of their shared space might not remain uninterrupted. Something was coming, and neither of them knew it yet. Talia didn't know why she stayed longer than necessary after that Tuesday evening. The rush had ended, the restaurant quieted to its usual soft hum, and her shift was technically over. Yet, she found herself lingering near Daniel's corner table, pretending to straighten the chairs, wipe the edge of the table, anything to justify being close without seeming out of place. Daniel, meanwhile, was methodical in finishing his meal. Each bite was slow, deliberate, like he was timing himself against some invisible clock. He didn't glance at her once, yet she felt his attention like a subtle weight pressing in her direction. It wasn't intrusive, just there. Observant, unwavering. After a moment he spoke, his voice low but steady. You don't have to linger here. She looked up, startled, caught mid-wipe. I know. Just thought. She stopped, realizing how flimsy her excuse sounded. You're not obligated to make conversation, he said. It's easier when people understand that. Talia smiled faintly, realizing that he wasn't scolding her. Just stating a fact. A boundary. The kind of honesty that felt rare, especially for someone in his position. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them, unpressured but potent. The quiet was comfortable, like the pause in a melody that makes you hold your breath for the next note. I like this, she said finally, surprising herself. Just sitting here. Talking. Sometimes not talking. Daniel glanced at her, a faint crease forming between his brows, as if he were weighing the risk of engaging too much. I like the quiet too. It lets me think about things I don't usually let myself. The sentence hung between them, and Talia felt an odd flutter of curiosity and concern. What kind of things did a man like him think about in moments like this? Do you ever feel invisible? She asked impulsively, her tone softer than intended. He paused, considering her question. Then he said, only when it benefits people to pretend I am. Talia blinked. The answer was unexpected, yet it resonated. She thought of all the times she had been ignored, overlooked, or underestimated because of her disability, because of the assumptions people made about her life. I get that, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Predictability is overrated. It only feels safe until it isn't. Her mind lingered on his words. There was a weight behind them, a kind of truth that made her chest tighten. People like Daniel had lives that seemed controlled and polished, yet even they faced uncertainty, isolation, and moments where the ground shifted beneath them. They talked about small things after that. The restaurant's lighting. How the menu seemed to change subtly each season. The difference between the way people treated regulars and newcomers. These were trivial details on the surface, but for Talia, they became a bridge between her world and his. You don't smile often, she remarked after a while, bold enough to risk the observation. I smile when it matters, he replied, eyes briefly meeting hers. Most things don't qualify. Talia chuckled softly, the sound light and unguarded. I think you underestimate the little things. He didn't respond immediately, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth suggested acknowledgement. Minutes passed, and the rhythm of the restaurant remained steady, but both of them felt the unusual pull of time stretching between them. There was comfort in the predictability but also tension, because neither knew where this connection might lead or if it even should. Eventually Talia straightened. Her leg had started to ache again. I should get back, she said, voice steady but reluctant. Daniel looked at her, expression unreadable for a beat. Then he said, You don't have to leave yet. If you don't want to. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was surprise or relief, or a mixture of both. She stayed just a little longer, feeling the quiet, contained space between them stretch and fold around them. For the first time, Talia felt that this wasn't about the table or even the restaurant. It was about being seen. Really seen. When she finally stood to leave, Daniel's gaze lingered on her back, steady and intentional. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't scrutiny. It was acknowledgement, a recognition that they both existed in the same moment, even if only fleetingly. As she returned to the floor, she realized something small but significant. These Tuesdays had begun to mean more than she'd expected. More than just a break from work. More than just routine. And somewhere in the quiet corner of that restaurant, she knew that the next week might hold something unexpected. Something neither of them could anticipate but both would feel. For now, all she could do was keep walking, steady her leg, and wonder what waiting just one more week could bring. By the next Tuesday, the rhythm had begun to feel familiar. Not routine in the dull sense, but a quiet pattern that neither Talia nor Daniel had planned yet both had fallen into. Talia arrived just before her shift, the evening air crisp against her skin. She had adjusted her prosthetic and tightened the strap at her thigh, a familiar ritual she performed almost unconsciously. By the time she stepped into the restaurant, the lights were warm and inviting, the hum of early diners already settling in. Daniel was already there, corner table, coat neatly folded over the chair beside him, eyes briefly scanning the room before returning to the window. He looked up as she entered, but this time there was a subtle acknowledgement, almost like a nod of recognition rather than formal greeting. Good evening, Talia said, setting down her apron and adjusting her posture. Good evening, he replied. His voice had the same measured calm, but there was a flicker, just a hint, of familiarity, a quiet sense that this moment was expected. She approached his table, not entirely sure why she was doing so. She told herself it was habit, that this was part of her shift. But deep down she knew it was more. May I sit? She asked softly, almost automatically. Daniel's lips curved slightly, barely noticeable. I was expecting you would. That small admission made her chest tighten. She lowered herself into the chair across from him. Relief flooded her legs as the prosthetic bore weight evenly. Her shoulders eased, and for a moment she simply breathed, aware of how rare these quiet seconds felt. They didn't speak immediately. Daniel took a careful sip of his water, eyes briefly moving to the window, then to her. Talia realized she didn't need to fill the silence. For the first time, quiet wasn't empty, it was shared. "So," Daniel said finally, "how's your week been?" Talia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Busy," she said simply. "Shifts stacked, tables full, customers scattered." She smiled faintly, a flash of humor she rarely allowed herself. "I think the floor has it in for me some days." He studied her, expression neutral but attentive. "Does it always feel like that?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But you adapt. You adjust. You survive." Daniel nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Adaptation is underrated. Most people just complain." Talia chuckled softly. "Not me," she said. "I'd rather figure out how to make it work." The conversation flowed, small and measured, but underneath, the tension of connection lingered. She noticed how he watched, not staring, not intrusive but aware. A man used to controlling everything, yet here he simply observed her. That recognition carried weight she hadn't anticipated. At one point, a child at a nearby table squealed, startling Talia. She jumped slightly and the prosthetic clicked audibly against the floor. Daniel glanced down, then back up at her with a subtle tilt of his head, a silent acknowledgement of her discomfort without commenting. "You handle that well?" he said quietly. "Handle what?" she asked. "Everything. Standing all day. Carrying on. Smiling when it's hard." Talia shook her head. "I'm not sure it's that impressive." He raised an eyebrow. "It is if it keeps going unnoticed by those who don't see." She paused, the weight of the statement settling over her. Most people never looked past the surface. Daniel did, in a way that was almost uncomfortable. The minutes stretched and the restaurant quieted further. She caught herself watching him, observing the small details he didn't know she noticed. The crease at the corner of his mouth when he considered words. The way he held the fork, deliberate and precise. The faint scent of soap and leather and something else she couldn't name. "I think," she said cautiously, "that maybe predictability isn't so bad." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Until it surprises you." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, both understood the unspoken truth. The predictability of Tuesdays was changing, and neither of them could fully anticipate how. When her shift ended, Talia rose, adjusting the prosthetic. "I should go," she said softly. "You can stay," Daniel replied, his tone gentle but firm. "If you want." She hesitated, but then shook her head. "Tomorrow is another day," she said with a faint smile. As she walked away, she felt his gaze follow her. Not judging. Not questioning. Simply noticing. And that alone left her unsettled in a way she didn't yet understand. Outside, the city lights reflected in the window behind her, stretching along the wet pavement like scattered thoughts. Talia knew this pattern was no longer just a coincidence. Something had begun quietly between the two of them, and the next week promised to reveal just how much. And yet, as the door closed behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else, something unexpected, was already waiting just out of sight. Talia's shift had been long, and by the time she returned to the corner table, the restaurant had quieted to the low hum of a few remaining diners. She wiped down the counter near the service station, pretending to be busy, though her eyes kept drifting toward Daniel. He was already there, as usual, coat folded neatly over the chair beside him, eyes scanning the room before settling back on the street outside. She knew she wasn't assigned to his table tonight, but she felt drawn there anyway. Not out of obligation. Not out of curiosity. Something deeper, something she couldn't name, pulled her attention like gravity. As she approached, Daniel looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. "Good evening," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Good evening," he replied. She lingered for a moment before speaking again. "I noticed something last week. You didn't ask about my leg." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "I noticed. I chose not to." Talia blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of his response. Most people either stared, asked questions she didn't want to answer, or offered pity. He had done neither. That was thoughtful, she said softly. He inclined his head slightly. I don't usually interfere in things that don't affect me. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't judgment. It was an observation. And yet it meant more than Talia expected. They settled into the quiet rhythm of conversation that had begun to feel natural. Small talk, about the weather, the menu, the ebb and flow of the restaurant, interspersed with moments of comfortable silence. Talia noticed how he listened, truly listened, without interrupting or assuming. You seem different from other people I wait on, Daniel said after a while. Not in a bad way. In a way I notice. Talia felt her chest tighten. I notice a lot, she admitted. Sometimes too much. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Then we might be equally observant. The words lingered in the space between them, heavier than either of them let on. For Talia, it was the first time she felt that someone didn't see her as broken, incomplete, or inconvenient. Daniel simply saw her. Their quiet connection was interrupted by a sudden clatter. A chair scraped against the floor near the bar, startling a child who had been seated nearby. Talia's prosthetic clicked against the floor as she adjusted her stance. Daniel glanced down once, then back up, acknowledging her discomfort without comment. You handle yourself well, he said quietly, almost to himself. Talia shook her head. It's not always graceful, she replied with a faint laugh. But I manage. He studied her for a long moment. Most people don't notice the effort. Or they don't care. The observation wasn't judgmental. It wasn't even pointed. It was recognition. And that recognition carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. Minutes passed. The restaurant grew quieter, the bustle of earlier hours fading to a gentle hum. Talia felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. Not just physically, though her leg appreciated the reprieve, but mentally, emotionally. You're easy to talk to, she said softly, even when I don't say much. Daniel's gaze met hers. And you make the quiet feel present, he replied. The words were small, but they held weight. They acknowledged the unspoken understanding growing between them, a connection that was quiet but real. When her shift finally ended, Talia stood, adjusting her prosthetic. I should get back, she said, though neither of them seemed to want the moment to end. You can stay, Daniel said softly, if you want. She shook her head, smiling faintly. Another day. As she walked back to the floor, she felt his gaze follow her. Not in a way that pressured her. Not in a way that demanded anything. Simply present. Observing. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Talia couldn't shake the feeling that the routine they had established was changing, that the predictability of Tuesdays was beginning to hold a different kind of tension, one neither of them could yet define. And as she returned to her duties, she sensed that the next Tuesday might bring something neither expected, something that could quietly reshape the space between them forever. Daniel sat in his corner table, fork paused midair, eyes fixed on the window as headlights streaked past. The restaurant's quiet hum wrapped around him, the low chatter and clinking glasses fading into background noise. He wasn't thinking about the food. He wasn't thinking about the evening. He was thinking about her. Talia Brooks. He had watched her navigate the floor countless times now. How she carried herself with quiet determination. How she managed the long hours without complaint. How she moved with precision yet never called attention to herself. There was a resilience there that intrigued him. Something genuine, uncalculated. Unlike the people in his world who smiled for cameras, nodded for appearances, or performed kindness for leverage. He took a deliberate sip of water, letting it settle, before shifting his attention back to her as she moved through the tables. She didn't see him, not really. Not the way he saw her. That night, something in her expression caught him off guard. A fleeting shadow of fatigue, a flicker of frustration, and then a quiet determination to keep moving. He recognized it immediately. He had worn that mask before. Every powerful person did. They carried their burdens quietly, hidden from view, carefully controlled. Daniel had always been cautious about letting anyone in. He had perfected the art of distance, keeping others at arm's length so they couldn't see the parts of him that were vulnerable, uncertain, human. And yet, week after week, she had been quietly present. Sitting. Observing. Not probing. Not intrusive. Just noticing. And in her noticing, she had broken something in him he hadn't realized was fragile. The careful wall of distance he had built around his life. He looked at her again. She adjusted the strap on her prosthetic, shifted her weight ever so slightly, and smiled at a customer who had asked a question about the menu. It was effortless, but the effort it required was clear. And he realized sharply that he was beginning to care. Daniel had not intended to care. He had not intended to notice. And yet, here he was, thinking about her long after she had left his line of sight. Thinking about her presence in a way that made him uncomfortable and curious all at once. He pushed the thought aside momentarily, returning his focus to the meal he hadn't touched. But the silence between the clinking glasses and hushed conversations was alive with tension. It wasn't pity. He would never pity her. There was no need. She carried herself with strength even when it hurt. What he felt was recognition. And the acknowledgement of that recognition was unsettling. A small laugh echoed from another table and he glanced up. Talia had gone to assist a young couple who had dropped their menu. Her prosthetic clicked against the floor softly, and he noticed it without trying. Most people didn't. Most people didn't care. And yet he did. Daniel realized he was beginning to understand something he hadn't allowed himself to before. That being seen, even in the quietest, smallest ways, could be dangerous. It could dismantle walls built over decades. It could awaken desires he hadn't wanted to confront. He leaned back slightly in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The rhythm of his heartbeat and the faint sound of her moving around the restaurant became intertwined. He had grown accustomed to control, to predictability, to the certainty that his life was contained. And now, unpredictability was sitting across from him, day after day, in the form of a waitress with one prosthetic leg and eyes that saw more than she should. When she returned to his table to refill his water, he caught himself staring longer than usual. He was aware of it. The corners of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost acknowledgement, but he looked away quickly. He wasn't accustomed to being vulnerable, to admitting that another person's presence could unsettle him so thoroughly. "Here you go," she said softly, placing the glass gently in front of him. Her eyes met his for a brief second, and in that instant something shifted, small, imperceptible, but undeniable. Daniel set the fork down and nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled faintly, a little tired, a little shy, and walked away. He watched her, noting the slight weariness in her movements, the careful grace she employed to navigate the room. For the first time in a long time, Daniel realized that predictability wasn't safety, and that being seen, truly seen, could be more unsettling than any risk he had ever faced in business or life. As the evening wound down, he returned to the window, staring at the streetlights and the occasional passing car. A single thought lingered in his mind. This girl, this small, determined, quiet presence, had begun to stir something in him he hadn't expected, and he didn't yet know what to do about it. And somewhere deep down, Daniel knew that the coming weeks wouldn't be the same. That the quiet Tuesdays he had relied on for structure might now carry consequences he hadn't prepared for. A small part of him welcomed it. Another part braced for what he already feared. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that two lives were quietly colliding, with the next Tuesday promising a shift neither could yet fully comprehend. The next Tuesday, Talia arrived early, her usual nervous energy tempered by a quiet anticipation she didn't fully understand. The restaurant smelled faintly of garlic and roasted vegetables, mingling with the clean scent of polished wood and waxed floors. She adjusted her prosthetic and tightened the strap at her thigh, feeling the familiar click with every careful step. Daniel was already there, corner table by the window, coat folded neatly, posture rigid yet calm. His eyes, when they met hers, carried the same steady attention, but there was something else tonight. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps even amusement. "Evening," he said, voice low and measured. "Evening," she replied, a little breathless from the walk across the floor. She approached his table, unsure why her pulse quickened at the sight of him. It wasn't desire exactly. Not yet. But there was something about the quiet authority in his presence that made her heart beat differently, more alertly, like she was stepping into unfamiliar territory. "May I sit?" she asked softly. He nodded, tilting the chair back slightly to make room. Of course. The comfort of the seat beneath her leg was immediate, though her mind remained alert. She folded her hands on the table, aware of the subtle click of her prosthetic against the floor as she settled in. They began their usual exchange. Small talk about the restaurant, the ebb and flow of customers, minor observations about the city outside, but there was an undercurrent of tension neither could ignore. Both had grown accustomed to Tuesdays, to the predictability of their meetings, yet tonight felt different. Daniel spoke first, his tone unusually casual. "Do you always ask to sit with me?" Talia hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "Only when I feel like I need a break. And maybe, when I want a moment without having to pretend I'm okay all the time." He studied her quietly, expression unreadable. "I see." The weight behind that single word made her glance up, meeting his eyes. It was almost an acknowledgement that he understood more than she had said. And somehow that made the silence between them heavier, more significant. "You're good at this," he said finally. "At being composed. Even when it's hard." She blinked. "Composed. Effortless, or at least it appears that way. Most people don't manage it, but you do." She felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I guess I've had practice," she replied softly, masking the vulnerability behind a faint laugh. Daniel allowed the laugh to linger in the quiet space between them. There was no ridicule, no judgment, just recognition. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the restaurant faded to background noise, the subtle scrape of chairs, the clinking of glasses blending into a muted rhythm. Talia felt her pulse in her ears. It wasn't fear. It was awareness, of him, of the unspoken connection growing quietly between them. Then, without warning, the restaurant doors swung open, and a gust of cold air brought in a man whose loud, brash voice cut through the atmosphere like a knife. "Talia," he called, approaching quickly, smiling broadly. "I didn't know you worked here tonight." Her stomach sank. She hadn't expected anyone from her past to show up, not here, not now. She turned slightly, tension coiling in her shoulders. Daniel looked up, brow raised, a subtle crease forming between his eyes. His calm demeanor didn't falter, but there was a flash of curiosity, almost amusement, in the corner of his gaze. Talia forced a polite smile. "This is unexpected," she said, voice steady though her hands tightened slightly on the table. The man reached out, clearly intending a friendly greeting, oblivious to the discomfort it caused. "I just wanted to say hi. Long time no see." Daniel's gaze didn't leave her. Not once. It was as if he were silently assessing, calculating, trying to understand how this intrusion fit into the quiet world they had carved out for themselves. Talia felt heat rising to her cheeks. She had thought Tuesdays were predictable. She had thought she could control this small, contained routine. And yet, here it was, a sudden, unpredictable ripple that threatened to disturb everything. "Sorry," she said finally, voice low. "I need to." Daniel's hand rested lightly on the table, fingers just visible, a subtle gesture of pause. "Take your time," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Protection. Permission. Something she hadn't realized she wanted until now. And as she glanced back at him, feeling the quiet steadiness in his presence, Talia knew that this Tuesday was the beginning of a shift neither of them had anticipated, and that the predictability of their connection might soon face a challenge neither was fully prepared for. Outside, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, indifferent to the quiet storm forming inside the restaurant. And somewhere deep in the corners of both their minds, the sense of something unexpected grew quietly, inexorably, waiting to reveal itself. The next Tuesday arrived with a restless energy that neither Talia nor Daniel could ignore. The restaurant smelled of sautéed onions and roasting chicken, familiar and grounding, yet something in the air felt different, as if the day itself had shifted just slightly. Talia arrived early as usual, adjusting her prosthetic, checking the strap at her thigh, and taking a deep breath. Her legs were stiff from a weekend of long walks and uneven terrain, but the familiar rhythm of the restaurant floor brought her some comfort. She liked knowing what to expect. Usually, Daniel was already there, sitting in his corner table, coat neatly folded over the chair beside him, eyes scanning the restaurant before settling on the street outside. But tonight there was a subtle change in him. A small tension in his shoulders, a sharpness to his gaze. He wasn't distracted. He was focused, and she could feel it across the room without realizing it. "Evening," she said softly as she approached, trying to hide the slight tremor in her fingers. "Evening," he replied, voice calm but carrying a note she hadn't heard before. She paused, unsure if she should sit immediately. The silence between them stretched, charged and heavy. Finally she asked, almost hesitantly, "May I?" He inclined the chair slightly. "Of course." As she lowered herself into the seat, the familiar relief in her leg contrasted sharply with the unfamiliar tension in the air. Something was coming, something that neither of them had spoken about but both could sense. They started with the usual small talk. The menu, the weather, the quiet rhythm of the restaurant. But underneath the words, there was a layer of unspoken tension. Talia noticed it in the way Daniel's eyes lingered just a second too long when she moved, and in the subtle way he shifted in his seat whenever the server passed by. "Something's different tonight," she said finally, breaking the silence. He looked at her, expression carefully neutral. "You noticed?" "I did," she admitted. "It's subtle, but I feel it." Daniel leaned back, taking a deliberate sip of water. "Good. Then we're both paying attention." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke in a quieter tone, one that carried weight she wasn't used to hearing from him. "I want to ask you something, but I'm not sure I should." Talia's pulse quickened. "Ask me," she said softly, almost without thinking. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Why do you really come here every week?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was enormous. She swallowed, feeling the vulnerability she rarely allowed herself. I don't know exactly. Maybe because it's a quiet place where I can just exist without feeling judged. And maybe because you let me." Daniel's gaze softened imperceptibly. "I see." She shifted slightly, trying to mask the heat rising in her cheeks. "It's not about you personally. I mean, it is, but not in the way you might think. It's simpler than that." His lips twitched, almost a smile, though he didn't allow it to fully form. "I'm not sure I understand." "Neither am I," she admitted. "That's the point." For several minutes they sat in silence, the quiet more intense than any conversation. Talia noticed how his fingers tapped lightly against the table edge, a rhythm so subtle she barely registered it, but it was deliberate, controlled, almost like he was counting thoughts. Then the restaurant door swung open and the bell above it jingled sharply. Talia looked up, expecting the usual stream of diners, but it wasn't a regular customer. It was someone she hadn't seen before. A man in a dark coat, mid-30s, walked straight toward Daniel's table, eyes sharp and calculating. Daniel's posture stiffened, and for the first time, Talia noticed a flicker of tension cross his usually composed features. "Daniel," the man said smoothly, voice low but insistent. We need to talk. Now. Talia froze, heart pounding, caught between stepping back and staying rooted. She didn't know the man, but the way Daniel's gaze sharpened told her enough. This was someone dangerous. Someone who didn't belong in the quiet rhythm they had established. Daniel's jaw tightened. Not here, he said firmly. It can't wait, the man replied, leaning slightly forward. Talia watched as Daniel's calm mask faltered for just a moment, just enough for her to see a hint of the storm beneath. He stood slowly, motioning for her to remain seated. As he followed the man to the door, Talia's mind raced. This Tuesday, which had begun like all the others, had shifted in an instant. The predictable rhythm they had built, quiet conversation, simple connection, mutual recognition, had been interrupted by something she couldn't yet understand. And as she sat alone at the corner table, heart still racing, Talia realized that the next Tuesday, and perhaps every Tuesday after, would never be the same again. Outside, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, indifferent to the sudden tension inside. But Talia knew, unpredictability had arrived, and neither she nor Daniel could ignore it. A low, almost imperceptible click of her prosthetic leg echoed in the quiet space as she shifted in her seat, unaware that the real test of their connection was only just beginning. Daniel didn't return right away. Talia sat at the corner table longer than she should have, her hands folded around a glass she hadn't touched. The chair across from her was empty now, its silence louder than the restaurant's background noise. She told herself not to read into it. People had interruptions. Important people especially. Still, the way Daniel's jaw had tightened, the way his shoulders had gone rigid before he stood, replayed in her mind on a loop. After a few minutes, she rose carefully, the soft click of her prosthetic marking each step as she returned to work. She forced herself back into routine, taking orders, refilling water, offering polite smiles. But something had shifted inside her. A thread had been pulled and she couldn't push it back into place. By the time her shift ended, Daniel still hadn't come back. She checked the corner table one last time, feeling foolish for hoping. The coat was gone. The glass untouched. Whatever that man had wanted, it had taken Daniel with him. Outside, the night air was sharp. Talia walked the few blocks to the bus stop slowly, giving her leg time to adjust. Her mind kept circling the same questions. Who was that man? Why had he come here? And why had Daniel looked cornered? The bus ride home was quiet. She stared out the window, city lights blurring past, trying to convince herself that she hadn't lost anything. After all, it wasn't like they had named what was happening between them. It was just conversation. Just Tuesdays. Still, the absence felt heavier than it should have. The following week, Daniel didn't show up at all. Talia noticed immediately. She noticed when the corner table stayed empty through the early dinner rush. When another server was assigned to it without hesitation. When the chair by the window remained pushed in, untouched. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself people had schedules, priorities, lives that didn't revolve around quiet restaurants and unspoken connections. But when the dinner rush faded and the restaurant settled into its familiar hum, the emptiness pressed in on her chest. The second week passed the same way. No Daniel. No folded coat. No measured voice asking how her week had been. By the third Tuesday she stopped checking. That was the week the pain flared. It started as a dull ache in her residual limb, the kind she usually worked through without complaint. By mid-shift, it had sharpened, radiating up her thigh. She adjusted the prosthetic in the back hallway, teeth clenched, breathing slow and controlled. "You okay?" one of the servers asked, glancing at her with concern. "Yeah," Talia said automatically. "Just need a minute." She took that minute sitting on a crate near the storage room, pressing her palm against her leg until the worst of it eased. She hated moments like this. Hated being reminded that no matter how well she adapted, her body still set limits without asking permission. When she returned to the floor, she avoided the corner table altogether. And then, near the end of the night, the bell above the door jingled. Talia looked up without thinking. Daniel stood just inside the entrance. He looked different. Thinner somehow. The calm precision was still there, but it was frayed at the edges. His coat wasn't folded neatly this time. It hung open as if he'd forgotten to adjust it. His eyes scanned the room with urgency before locking onto her. Relief hit her first. Sharp and unexpected. Then came something else. Anger maybe. Or disappointment. He crossed the room quickly, stopping a few steps away from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by the awareness of him standing there, breathing a little harder than usual. "You disappeared," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but it cost her effort. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I didn't plan to." "That's funny," she replied quietly. "Neither did I." He looked at her, then really looked at her, as if registering the strain in her posture, the way she favored her leg. His jaw tightened. "Can we sit?" he asked. Not as a demand. As a request. She hesitated, then nodded. They returned to the corner table, the space reclaiming them with eerie familiarity. Daniel pulled out her chair before she could stop him, then caught himself, stepping back as if unsure whether he'd crossed a line. She sat anyway. "I should have said something," he began, fingers laced together on the table. "I didn't want to involve you in complications." Talia let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You don't get to decide that after you let someone in." The words surprised them both. Daniel didn't argue. He nodded once, slowly. "You're right." Silence stretched between them, heavier than before. "That man," she said, keeping her voice low, "is he the reason you vanished?" "Yes." "Is he dangerous?" Daniel met her eyes. "He can be." The honesty startled her. He wasn't deflecting. He wasn't smoothing it over. Talia swallowed. "Then why are you here?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I realized something was missing. And because I don't walk away from things that matter." Her pulse quickened. She didn't know yet that this was the moment everything truly changed. That whatever had followed Daniel into the restaurant that night wasn't done with him. Or with her. And as the city pressed in quietly beyond the window, Talia sensed that the connection she thought was fragile had just crossed into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. The days after Daniel's return felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened around their quiet Tuesdays. Talia tried to tell herself that nothing had really changed. He was back. He was sitting at the corner table again. His voice still carried that calm, deliberate tone. But she could feel it. The pauses were longer now. The silences sharper. Whatever he had stepped away from had followed him back. On Tuesday evening, the sky hung low and gray, rain threatening but never quite falling. The restaurant filled slowly, the soft jazz playing overhead doing little to mask the tension coiled inside her chest. Talia adjusted her prosthetic before stepping onto the floor, already aware that her leg was irritated. Not enough to stop her. Enough to remind her she wasn't invincible. Daniel arrived later than usual. When he entered, his gaze went straight to her, skipping the room entirely. That alone set her nerves on edge. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just walked to the corner table and waited. She finished taking an order, then crossed the room, every step deliberate. "You're late," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied. "I didn't want to come. And I didn't want to stay away." She took the seat across from him, careful, slow. "Those two things don't usually exist together." "They do when the consequences are shared," he said. That made her pause. Shared how? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the window, watching a car crawl past on the slick street. "Someone from my past resurfaced," he said finally. "Not business. Not family. Something unresolved." Talia leaned back slightly, giving him space but not distance. "Unresolved tends to be dangerous." "Yes," he agreed. "That's why I tried to disappear for a while." Her jaw tightened. "You don't disappear from people you invite into your life." "I didn't invite you." he said softly. Then, seeing her expression change, he added, "You chose to sit. I allowed it. There's a difference." The words stung more than she expected. She inhaled slowly. "You're right," she said. "But allowing someone close still creates responsibility." Daniel met her gaze, something conflicted passing through his eyes. "That responsibility is exactly what I was trying to avoid." For a moment, neither spoke. The restaurant noise filled the space between them, clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Talia shifted slightly, her leg protesting. Daniel noticed immediately. "Is it hurting?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. "A little. It happens. Because of the long shifts? Because life doesn't pause just because something hurts," she replied. He looked down at his hands. "I know that feeling." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. It was the first time he had drawn a direct line between them instead of keeping everything carefully separated. "Tell me about him," she said quietly. Daniel's fingers tightened together. "He used to work for me. Trusted. Brilliant. I didn't see what he was becoming until it was too late. And now he believes I owe him something," Daniel said. "Not money. Access." Talia's stomach dropped. "Access to what?" "To me," he replied. "To my life. To leverage." She absorbed that in silence. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because if he decides you matter," Daniel said carefully, "you become part of the equation. And I need to know if you're willing to walk away before that happens." The words landed hard. Talia felt heat rise behind her eyes, not from fear but from something sharper. "So this is a warning," she said. "Or a dismissal?" "It's a choice," he replied. "One I should have offered sooner." She leaned forward slightly, ignoring the ache in her leg. "You don't get to decide what I can handle," she said. "You don't get to protect me by erasing me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I've lost people by not protecting them. And I've lost myself by letting people decide what risks I'm allowed to take," she shot back. The tension between them crackled, quiet but intense. A server passed nearby, glancing at them curiously, sensing the gravity of the moment. Talia forced herself to breathe evenly. "If you want me gone," she said, voice steady, "say it." Daniel looked at her for a long time. Longer than usual. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I don't want you gone," he said. "That's the problem." Her pulse quickened. Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled sharply. Talia glanced up instinctively. The man from before stood just inside the entrance, scanning the room with practiced ease. Daniel saw him at the same moment. And this time the man smiled. Not at Daniel. At Talia. The shift in the room was immediate, like a wire pulled too tight. Daniel stood slowly. "You should leave," he said under his breath. Talia didn't move. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm not invisible," she said. "And I'm not fragile." The man took a step closer, still smiling. And in that moment, Talia realized that the choice Daniel had offered her wasn't theoretical anymore. It had arrived, standing in the doorway watching her closely. The restaurant seemed to shrink around Talia as the man in the doorway took another step forward, the soft hum of conversation fading into a distant buzz. She could feel Daniel's presence across the table, tense and taut, like a wire stretched too far. For a moment, she considered retreating, stepping back into the safety of the floor. But something inside her refused. The man's gaze swept over her, sharp and calculating, as if measuring her resolve. He smiled, not friendly, not welcoming, but the kind of smile that suggested he knew more than he let on. Talia's stomach twisted. She recognized danger. Not distant, abstract danger. Immediate, focused, and probing. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Leave. Now." The man's smile widened. "I think she's part of this, isn't she?" Talia's heart thudded in her chest. She didn't know exactly what this meant, but the tone made it clear it wasn't good. Her eyes darted to Daniel. His jaw was tight, fingers interlaced on the table, the calm mask fraying at the edges she had never seen before. "I'm not part of anything," she said carefully. "I'm just here." "That's what makes it interesting," the man said, stepping closer. His shoes clicked against the floor, each sound amplified in the tension-filled space. Daniel's hand rested lightly on hers across the table. Just a touch, brief but enough to anchor her. "You need to trust me," he said quietly. She nodded, though her pulse raced. Trust had always been a complicated word in her life. People had failed her, ignored her, dismissed her strength. But here, in this moment, she felt the subtle reassurance in his grip. A promise, perhaps. The man's eyes flicked between them. "I see you've grown close," he said, tone mocking. Funny, how quickly people become involved when they weren't supposed to. Daniel's voice didn't rise. "Back off. You're not touching her." The man tilted his head, a faint chuckle escaping. "I don't need to touch her. She's already drawn in. The question is, will she survive knowing the truth?" Talia's mind raced. The words felt like a puzzle with pieces she didn't yet understand. "What truth?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man's smile never wavered. "Everything he's hiding. Everything you don't know. And soon you'll both find out whether trust is enough." Daniel's eyes darkened, and for the first time Talia saw a flicker of fear, or maybe anger, so deep that it unsettled her in a way she hadn't anticipated. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "I said leave. Now." The man laughed softly, unnervingly. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. Not until I see how far this little arrangement goes." Talia felt her body tense. Something about the way he said arrangement made her skin crawl. She glanced at Daniel again. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching, but there was an intensity there that made her chest tighten. "Whatever this is," she said, trying to sound confident, "I'm not leaving because you show up. Not now. Not ever." Daniel's hand squeezed hers gently. "Good," he said quietly, "because you won't be safe if you leave. Not like this. Not yet." The man shifted slightly, as if assessing the two of them. "Bold," he said. "But bold doesn't always survive." Talia's pulse thundered in her ears. The restaurant, once her safe space, felt suddenly fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. Her leg ached, her mind raced, but she refused to move back. She refused to let fear dictate her actions. Daniel's voice, low and controlled, cut through the tension. "You're leaving nothing to chance. That's why you're alive right now. But this," he gestured subtly at the man, "this ends tonight. One way or another." The man's smirk widened. "We'll see, won't we?" And with that, he stepped back toward the door, letting the bell jingle softly as he exited. The restaurant's normal hum slowly returned, but the air between Talia and Daniel remained charged, heavy with unspoken understanding. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand finally retreating from hers. He leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders lingering. "He'll be back," he said quietly. Talia nodded, feeling the weight of his words, and the realization hit her fully. This was only the beginning. Whatever was coming next, neither of them would face it alone. But neither of them could predict how much it would change everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. Outside, rain finally began to fall, soft and steady, blurring the city lights. And inside, the quiet corner table held a new truth. Danger was no longer abstract, trust had become urgent, and the game between them had just begun. The rain didn't stop that night. It followed Talia all the way home, tapping softly against the bus windows, streaking the streetlights into long, trembling lines. She sat near the back, one hand gripping the pole, the other resting on her thigh where the ache had settled deep and insistent. But it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the man's smile. And Daniel's warning. He'll be back. By the time she reached her apartment, her nerves felt stretched thin. The building was old, the hallway lights flickering the way they always did. She locked her door, then checked it again. That hadn't been part of her routine before. Now it was. Sleep came in fragments. Images bled into one another. Daniel's hand on hers. The man's voice, calm and amused. The word access echoing in her head like a threat she couldn't yet define. When morning came, Talia moved through her day on autopilot. She skipped breakfast, double-checked her prosthetic fit, and ignored the dull throb in her leg. At work, she dropped a tray. The clatter startled her so badly she had to step into the back hallway to breathe. "You sure you're okay?" her manager asked, concern creasing his face. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. It was a lie she'd practiced for years. The next Tuesday arrived faster than she expected. Daniel was already there when she came in, standing this time, not sitting. He was on his phone, voice low, clipped. When he saw her, he ended the call immediately. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Her jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide that." He exhaled, slow and controlled. "He followed me yesterday." The words landed hard. "Followed you where?" she asked. "Out of my office. Through traffic. He wanted me to notice." "And you did?" "Yes." They sat, but the table felt smaller now. No quiet comfort. No shared silence. Just pressure. "There's something I haven't told you," Daniel said. His voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "Not because I didn't trust you. Because I didn't want it to touch you." "Too late," she said softly. He nodded. "Years ago, I funded a private rehabilitation program. Experimental. It was meant to help people with severe injuries regain function faster. Neural interfaces. Early stage, poorly regulated." Talia stilled. "One of the first participants was him," Daniel continued. "He was injured in an industrial accident. Lost mobility in one arm. He blamed the company. Blamed me. I believed in the program. I pushed it forward." "And something went wrong," Talia said. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "The program was shut down quietly. Non-disclosure agreements. Settlements. But he didn't want money. He wanted control. He believes I owe him the life he didn't get back." Talia's throat felt dry. "And now he's using me." Daniel shook his head. "He's trying to. He thinks you're leverage. A weakness." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's funny. Most people assume I'm already weak." Daniel looked at her sharply. "You're not." "I know," she replied. "But that doesn't mean I'm untouchable." The restaurant door opened. Talia's muscles tensed instinctively. It was just a couple shaking off the rain. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. "I won't disappear again," Daniel said quietly. "But you need to understand something. If he pushes harder, things could get ugly. Legal pressure. Public exposure. He's already been hinting at leaks." "About the program?" "Yes. And about you." Her heart skipped. "About me how?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. "You looked into me," she said slowly. He nodded once. "After the first time he showed up. I needed to know what he could use." "And?" she asked. Daniel's voice was careful. "You weren't born with one leg." The room seemed to tilt. "No," she said. "I wasn't." "He knows," Daniel continued. "About the accident. About the settlement your family refused. About the case that never went to trial." Talia's hands curled into fists beneath the table. That part of her life was buried. Deliberately. Painfully. "He thinks your past makes you predictable," Daniel said. "Easier to pressure." She leaned back, forcing her breathing to stay even. "Then he doesn't know me at all." Daniel met her gaze, something like respect flickering there. "That's what scares him." The rain streaked down the window beside them, blurring the city beyond. Talia realized then that this wasn't just about Daniel's past catching up with him. It was about hers too. And whatever came next wouldn't just test their connection. It would force them both to confront the parts of themselves they had survived, but never fully faced. The next few days unfolded with an uneasy stillness, the kind that felt like a held breath. Talia went to work, came home, slept lightly, and woke too early. Nothing obvious happened. No confrontations. No messages. No strangers waiting outside her building. And yet, she felt watched in ways she couldn't explain. On Thursday evening, she noticed a car idling across the street when she left work. On Friday, a missed call from an unknown number appeared on her phone, no voicemail left behind. By Sunday, she'd memorized the sound of her own door locking, the subtle scrape of the bolt sliding into place. She didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. When Tuesday came again, the restaurant felt too bright, too open. The corner table by the window looked exposed now, like a spotlight instead of a refuge. Daniel arrived late, his expression tightly controlled, jaw set in a way that told her he hadn't slept much either. They didn't sit right away. I think he's escalating, Daniel said quietly as soon as she approached. Talia didn't ask how he knew. I feel it too, she replied. He studied her, searching her face. Has anything happened? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not enough to prove. Enough to notice. Daniel exhaled. That's how he works. He doesn't push hard at first. He wants you unsettled. Well, congratulations to him, she said dryly. It's working. A faint, humorless smile crossed Daniel's face. It disappeared just as quickly. There's something else, he said. And I need you to hear it without reacting. Her chest tightened. That's not a great way to start. He didn't argue. The rehabilitation program wasn't the only thing he was involved in. Talia's posture stiffened. Go on. He was also connected to a legal case. Not directly named, but close enough. A transportation company. Faulty safety protocols. A collision that never made it to trial. The room seemed to go quiet around her. Daniel, she said slowly, why are you telling me this? Because your accident wasn't random. The words struck harder than anything the other man had said. My accident was a drunk driver, Talia replied, voice tight. That's what the police said. That's what the reports said. Yes, Daniel said. And the vehicle you were in had a known braking defect. One that companies settled quietly on before it went public. Talia felt heat rush to her face. My parents were offered a settlement, she said. They refused because it came with a non-disclosure agreement. Daniel nodded. And shortly after, the company was acquired. Files were sealed. Cases disappeared. Her hands trembled slightly, and she clenched them together under the table. You're saying, he knows this? He knows, Daniel said. And he believes you don't. Talia leaned back, staring at the window at the rain streaking down the glass. Memories surfaced uninvited. Hospital lights. The sound of her mother crying in a hallway. A lawyer explaining options her parents didn't trust. So that's the leverage, she said. Not just me. The story of me. Yes, Daniel replied. He thinks forcing it into the open will destabilize you. Or force me to choose. Choose between what? You, Daniel said quietly. And protecting what's left of my reputation. The honesty of it left her breathless. You think I'd want you to protect me by hiding the truth? She asked. I don't know what you want, he admitted. I only know what he thinks you'll fear. Talia was silent for a long moment. Then she said, he's wrong. Daniel looked at her sharply. I didn't lose my leg because of truth, she continued. I lost it because of silence. Because powerful people decided the cost of transparency was too high. Her voice was steady now, grounded. If he thinks exposing the past will break me, she said, he doesn't understand what survival actually looks like. Daniel watched her like he was seeing her for the first time. There's a risk, he said. Once this starts, it won't stop cleanly. She nodded. I know. And if this goes public, Daniel continued, you'll be scrutinized. Your medical history. Your family. Everything. Talia met his gaze. I've lived in a body people already scrutinize. I can handle being seen. That was the moment the balance shifted. Daniel leaned back slowly, something like resolve settling into his expression. Then we stop reacting, he said, and start deciding. She tilted her head. Together? Yes, he replied. If you're still willing. Talia didn't answer right away. She glanced around the restaurant at the ordinary people eating ordinary meals, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding nearby. Then she looked back at him. I didn't ask to be part of this, she said, but I won't be used as a threat. Or a shield. Daniel nodded. Neither will I. As she stood to return to work, her leg protested sharply. She paused, steadying herself. Daniel rose instinctively, then stopped, letting her find her balance on her own. When she walked away, he didn't follow her with his eyes this time. He was thinking. And somewhere, far beyond the warm lights of the restaurant, someone else was watching too, realizing that intimidation had failed, and that the next move would require something far more dangerous than fear. The following Tuesday arrived with a tension that made the air feel heavier than usual. The city outside had been raining for days, leaving streets slick and reflecting the neon glow of traffic lights. Talia adjusted her prosthetic carefully as she walked through the restaurant doors, feeling every familiar click amplified in her mind. She'd spent the week replaying Daniel's words, his warnings, and the revelation about her past. It felt like a weight she carried on her shoulders, pressing her into a sharper awareness of every step, every glance, every conversation. Daniel was already there, sitting at the corner table, coat draped over the chair, fingers laced on the table as he watched the restaurant. But this time there was a difference. His posture was slightly rigid, alert in a way that told Talia the other man had not given up. That danger hadn't disappeared. It had only been waiting, patient, calculated. She approached quietly, taking the chair across from him. They exchanged the usual polite greeting, but the usual comfort of their shared Tuesdays was gone. Both were aware of the fragile thread holding the moment together. Daniel broke the silence first. He's escalating, he said softly. Talia's pulse quickened, though she didn't show it. How? He's contacting people I thought were allies. Attempting leverage. Legal threats. Subtle inquiries about you. Your past. The settlement. The case. Her stomach tightened. Why me? Daniel leaned back, voice low. Because he thinks you're vulnerable. That the one leg, the past, it makes you predictable, easier to manipulate. She let out a short laugh, humorless and bitter. If he thinks he can break me with fear, he doesn't know me. Daniel's eyes softened slightly, a flicker of admiration hiding behind the tension. Neither do I, he said. They spent a few minutes in quiet conversation, strategizing, planning, weighing options. Talia found herself noticing details about him she hadn't before. The subtle tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible crease near his eyes, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the table when he was deep in thought. These weren't flaws. They were signs of a man who carried responsibility so heavily that it left visible marks. Then, without warning, the restaurant doors swung open. A gust of cold air swept across the room, bringing with it the unmistakable presence of someone dangerous. Talia's heart leapt. She didn't need to see him fully to know it was him. The man from before, the one Daniel had warned her about. He moved with confidence, almost casual, his eyes scanning the restaurant before locking onto her. A faint smirk tugged at his lips, like he had won some private victory she wasn't aware of. Daniel noticed immediately, standing slowly, his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. His gaze was sharp, controlled, warning clear. "Stay seated," he said quietly, just enough for her to hear. The man's eyes flicked between them. "Quite the partnership," he said smoothly, voice low, carrying an undertone of amusement and menace. "I see why he values you." Talia's chest tightened. She didn't like the implication that her presence alone was leverage. But she refused to show fear. I'm not leverage, she said steadily. He chuckled softly. Oh, but you are. Just by being who you are. And he can't protect you forever. Daniel's jaw tightened, his entire frame tensing like a coiled spring. Back off, he said sharply, voice controlled but dangerous. The man didn't move. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here to make a point. Talia's stomach churned. The threat was clear, even without physical aggression. She felt the ache in her leg deepen, though she ignored it, focusing instead on keeping her composure. Daniel's eyes met hers. There was something unspoken in that glance. A promise, a warning, a plan forming. He wasn't just protecting her because he had to. He was protecting her because he had chosen to. The man's smirk faded slightly. He could see the tension, the unspoken bond between them. He tilted his head. Enjoy your Tuesday, he said, voice low. But know this, it's only the beginning. And with that, he turned and left, the bell above the door ringing sharply as it closed. Talia exhaled slowly, relief mixed with a lingering sense of unease. Daniel remained standing for a moment longer, scanning the restaurant, then finally lowered himself back into his chair. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her. I'm fine, she said. I'm used to people thinking they can intimidate me. Daniel's expression softened, but the tension didn't fully leave his eyes. This isn't just intimidation, he said quietly. He's testing us. Seeing what he can manipulate. Seeing what he can break. Talia swallowed. Then let him try, she said. We'll see who's stronger. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to argue, to caution her, to insist she didn't understand the full danger. But he didn't. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the resilience she had carried all her life, and for the first time he realized she wasn't someone who could be protected. She was someone who chose to fight. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft and steady. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, indifferent to the quiet storm building inside a small corner of the restaurant. And Talia knew, as she settled back into the rhythm of the floor, that the next Tuesdays would be different. Not easier, not safer, but sharper, charged, and alive in a way that neither she nor Daniel could ignore. The first test had passed, but the next move, the real reckoning, was coming. The city felt heavier that week. Even on the brightest days, Talia sensed shadows lurking, stretching long and cold. Every familiar street, every bus stop, every restaurant doorway seemed charged with possibility or threat. She tried to tell herself it was paranoia, the natural consequence of being aware of someone who had already crossed the line into her life. But it wasn't just that. She knew instinctively, the man wasn't finished. When Tuesday came, Talia arrived early, adjusting her prosthetic with care, testing the strap for comfort, taking a few quiet breaths to steady herself. The restaurant smelled of warm bread, simmering sauces, and the faint undertone of coffee grounds, a familiar comfort in the chaos of her thoughts. Daniel was already seated at the corner table, notebook open, a pen poised in his hand. His eyes flicked up when she entered, scanning her carefully as if measuring her readiness. The usual casual calm was gone, replaced by a focus so sharp it made her chest tighten. You've been quiet this week, he said softly, voice low enough for the surrounding diners not to notice. I've been thinking, she replied, sliding into her chair. About him. About you. About everything. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. I need you sharp. He's moving faster than I anticipated. And he won't wait for the right moment. He'll create it. Talia swallowed. Create it how? Daniel leaned forward, voice barely audible over the soft hum of conversation. Pressure. Exposure. Threats disguised as coincidence. Anything to make us react. Her stomach tightened. Then what do? We anticipate, he said simply. And we act on what we know. A server approached, and Talia excused herself briefly to help with an order. Her leg ached more than usual, a reminder that she was human, vulnerable, not invincible. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and returned to the table. Daniel looked up at her, eyes sharp. "I found something," he said quietly, sliding a folded envelope across the table. Talia hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, snapshots from surveillance cameras she hadn't recognized. The man from before, watching from the street, sometimes from the restaurant entrance, always maintaining a careful distance, always observing. Her pulse accelerated. "How long has he been doing this?" "Long enough," Daniel said. "Long enough that we need to assume he knows more than he should. And that he's planning something beyond threats." Talia pressed her fingers against the table, knuckles white. "Planning what?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet. But I have a sense. And it's not small." For the first time, Talia felt a tangible weight on her chest. The realization that this was bigger than her, bigger than the restaurant, bigger than the quiet routines they had tried to hold on to. "You're not leaving," she said firmly. "Not now. Not ever." "I wouldn't dream of it," Daniel replied, a faint edge of something like relief flickering across his face. They sat in silence for a moment, the soft jazz in the background doing little to calm the tension. Then the bell above the door jingled. Talia's head snapped toward the sound, her instincts sharp. A man entered, soaked from the rain, hat pulled low over his eyes. She felt her pulse spike. Every muscle in her body tensed. Daniel's hand brushed hers lightly. "Stay calm," he said under his breath. The man walked past their table without a glance, disappearing into the back of the restaurant. But Talia felt it in her chest, a prickling, familiar, dangerous sense of being watched. Daniel leaned closer, voice low. "That's him. He's testing boundaries, seeing how far he can go without triggering a reaction." Talia swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" "We wait," Daniel said, eyes sharp and calculating. "And we prepare. Because the first real move is coming. And it will change everything." The weight of his words settled in her chest. And as the rain continued to streak the city outside the window, Talia realized the fragile rhythm of their Tuesdays was gone forever. The game had changed. And neither she nor Daniel would know the rules until the next move was made. Her leg ached. Her heart raced. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, someone was watching, waiting, calculating, preparing for a play that neither of them could fully anticipate. Tuesday arrived in a cold, gray drizzle. The restaurant smelled of fried onions, roasted chicken, and something faintly metallic from the rain pressing against the windows. Talia walked through the door, prosthetic clicking softly against the tile floor, every step deliberate. Her senses were sharper than usual. The air, the conversations, the subtle movements of the diners all felt like signals she needed to read. Daniel was already there, seated at the corner table, his coat draped over the chair. He didn't glance at her immediately. Instead, he stared at the restaurant entrance, fingers laced together, jaw tight. The calm he usually wore like armor was fractured, and she could see it. "You're early," he said finally, voice low. "I don't want to be late," she replied. She slid into the chair across from him. "Something's happening, isn't it?" He didn't answer immediately, just watched her as if measuring her readiness. Finally he spoke. "He's planning his first direct move. Not intimidation, not surveillance. Something that will force our hand." Her pulse quickened. "And we know this how?" Daniel tapped the envelope he had placed beside his plate. "Reports. Contacts. Footage. He's been preparing. Quietly. Deliberately." Talia swallowed, the weight pressing against her chest. "So he's coming for us?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "And it's going to be more than a threat. It will force decisions." The restaurant's hum suddenly felt intrusive, almost absurd compared to the tension coiling between them. Talia could feel her leg throbbing beneath her chair, the ache now a reminder of her vulnerability. But she refused to let it control her. She'd faced physical limits her whole life. She could face this too. They spoke quietly, discussing contingencies, watching the restaurant's entrance for any sign of movement. Daniel's voice carried calm authority, but she could detect the tension beneath it, the careful calculation of a man accustomed to control, now aware of variables he couldn't fully predict. Hours passed in this delicate equilibrium, the restaurant filling and emptying, the day slipping toward evening. Then, just as the orange glow of the streetlights began to spill across the wet pavement, the bell above the door jingled sharply. Talia's head snapped toward the sound. The man from before entered. He wasn't alone this time. 2 others followed, faces obscured by hats and hoods. He moved with confidence, each step measured, eyes scanning before settling on her. Daniel rose immediately, placing a hand lightly on the back of her chair. "Stay," he said under his breath. The man smiled, a slow, calculated smile. "Evening," he said, voice carrying through the restaurant just enough to draw attention. "I hope you don't mind me bringing company." Talia's stomach nodded. She felt the tension of the moment settle deep in her bones. The usual safe cocoon of the restaurant had disappeared, replaced by a sense of imminent danger. Daniel's gaze was locked on the intruders, his jaw tight. "What do you want?" he asked calmly, dangerously. The man tilted his head. "Merely to ensure you understand the stakes. You've both been very cooperative so far. But now it's time to test resolve." Talia's chest tightened. She realized that nothing could have prepared her for the intensity in his eyes, the way he measured every movement, every expression. Daniel leaned slightly toward her. "This isn't just about us," he said quietly. "It's about everything we represent. Calm, order, choice, all of it threatens him. And he will do whatever he can to disrupt it." The intruder took a deliberate step closer, his companions flanking him slightly, like predators circling. "Tonight," he said slowly, "we see if fear can be manufactured, or if loyalty runs deeper." Talia felt her pulse spike, her leg trembling beneath the table. She clenched her hands, forcing herself to breathe evenly to maintain focus. Daniel's hand brushed hers lightly, the simple touch a lifeline. "We've prepared," he whispered. "Stay with me." She nodded, her grip tightening subtly. The man smirked again, then turned to his companions. "Make the point clear. Let them understand the consequences of choice." And in that moment, Talia realized fully, this wasn't just a game. It wasn't just intimidation. This was a test, one that would push both her and Daniel to the edge, revealing who they truly were and what they were capable of when confronted by someone who didn't play by rules. The restaurant lights flickered faintly, rain tapping against the windows like the countdown of a clock. And Talia knew the next move, whatever it would be, was about to arrive. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware. Inside, everything had changed. The first blow of the real confrontation was only moments away. The restaurant had never felt smaller. Even the regular diners seemed to sense the tension, lowering their voices, avoiding the corner table where Talia and Daniel sat, eyes fixed on the door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the wet streets outside reflected every neon sign, every passing car, turning the city into a fragmented mirror of light and shadow. Talia's leg throbbed beneath her chair, but she barely noticed. Her pulse hammered in her ears, her mind cycling through every possible outcome, every strategy they discussed over the past weeks. Daniel sat across from her, posture rigid, jaw tight, hands clenched on the table. He didn't glance at the menu. He didn't glance at the diners. His focus was entirely on the restaurant entrance. The door opened. But it wasn't the man from before. It was someone she hadn't expected. A woman, mid-30s, hair tied back in a severe bun, sharp eyes that took in the room like a predator measuring her territory. She moved with confidence, heels clicking softly against the floor, and when her gaze landed on Daniel, there was a subtle shift, a recognition that made the hair on Talia's arms rise. "Daniel Carter?" the woman asked, voice calm but firm. He stiffened. "Yes." She held up a badge briefly before tucking it away. FBI. I've been tracking someone connected to you. He's a dangerous operative with access to confidential programs. He's moving fast and I need to know everything you can provide. Talia felt her stomach drop. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw the tension of someone used to control meeting the force of protocol and authority. Protocol? Daniel muttered under his breath. Yes, the woman replied. He's using connections, legal loopholes, and surveillance. He's manipulating people, innocent people, and you've both been in his crosshairs longer than you realize. Talia glanced at Daniel, then back at the agent. So, this whole time it's bigger than him showing up in a restaurant? Daniel nodded, finally exhaling slowly. Much bigger. And he's been planning moves we couldn't see. Until now. The agent's eyes flicked to Talia. And you? She asked gently. Are you okay? Talia hesitated. I think so. But I've been warned. And I've been tested. The agent nodded. He's escalating. Soon it won't just be warnings. He has the capacity to make people disappear, or worse, without legal consequence for a time. That's why I'm here. We intervene now or things get unpredictable. Daniel's fingers drummed on the table. We don't know everything about him yet. That's why I need cooperation, the agent said firmly. We need intelligence on patterns, contacts, movements. And both of you need to be careful. He knows about you, your past, your leg. He knows how to exploit weaknesses. Talia's pulse quickened. Her life, her past, everything she thought was private, suddenly felt exposed. But she noticed something in Daniel, a rare flicker of hope. If an agency like this was involved, maybe the dangerous chess game could tilt in their favor. The agent handed them a folder, contents classified but enough for them to begin understanding the scope. Photos, intercepted messages, financial trails, all pointing toward a network Talia had never imagined. You'll need to disappear from predictable routines, the agent said. Stay together, trust each other, and avoid exposure. He's calculating every move, and he won't hesitate if he sees vulnerability. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. Then he opened them, looking at Talia. This changes everything. Talia nodded. I know. But it doesn't change us. The agent stepped back toward the door. Stay alert. Next time he moves, it will be fast. And it will be personal. When the bell jingled behind her, Talia realized for the first time that the stakes weren't only about trust, courage, or loyalty anymore. They were about survival. Daniel reached across the table, brushing her hand lightly. We'll face this together, he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of unspoken fear. Outside, the city lights blurred in the rain, indifferent to the quiet storm that had just landed in a small corner of a restaurant. Inside, Talia understood one truth fully: nothing would ever be ordinary again. And the next move, the one that could destroy everything, was only a matter of time. The night air was sharp and cold as Talia and Daniel left the restaurant. Rain had stopped, but the streets glistened like glass under the city lights. The folder the FBI agent had handed them burned lightly in Talia's mind, filled with proof of a network she could barely comprehend. Every name, every photograph, every message was a reminder that the danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. It was close. And it was personal. Daniel walked beside her, his pace steady, controlled. She noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. This wasn't the composed billionaire she had met weeks ago. This was a man preparing for war. And somehow she was part of it. We can't go back to normal, Daniel said quietly, voice low against the hum of the city. Not after what we just learned. Talia's prosthetic clicked against the pavement as she stopped briefly to catch her balance. Normal? She repeated. I don't think I've ever had normal. But I do know this. I'm not hiding anymore. Daniel glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I see that. And it's unsettling but good. They walked in silence for a moment, The only sounds the distant wail of a siren and the soft drip of water from an awning above. Then a sudden movement in the alley to their left made them both freeze. Shadows shifted. Footsteps approached, cautious but deliberate. Daniel's hand brushed hers lightly, a signal of both warning and connection. Talia's heart pounded, not with fear, but with adrenaline, clarity sharpening every sense. The man from before stepped out of the shadows, his smirk returning, but now it was edged with tension. He wasn't alone. Two figures flanked him, just far enough to be threatening but close enough to control the space. "You've been busy," he said, voice low but carrying over the stillness of the street. "I see you've involved others now. Friends in high places, protection, planning. Clever. But clever doesn't always win." Talia's pulse raced, but she squared her shoulders. "We're not here for clever. We're here for truth. And we're not afraid of you." The man's smirk faltered slightly. "Truth? You don't know what that word costs." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Talia and the threat. "And yet we do," he said, voice low, steady but lethal in its calm. "We know the cost. And we're ready to pay it together." The man's eyes flicked to Talia, then back to Daniel. For the first time, Talia saw uncertainty. Calculated, yes, but uncertainty. "You think this ends here?" he asked. "No," Daniel said simply. "It ends the way it should. On our terms." Talia felt the weight of those words. All the fear, all the tension, all the secrets, they had led to this confrontation. And now, finally, the choice wasn't about running. It was about standing, about being seen fully, without hiding, without compromise. The man paused. His companions shifted uneasily. Then, with a measured nod, he backed down, not out of fear but because he understood at last that their resolve was something he could not manipulate. As the three figures disappeared back into the shadows, Daniel exhaled, finally letting his shoulders relax. He turned to Talia, his eyes softening. "We did it," he said quietly. Talia shook her head, smiling despite the lingering tension. "No, we survived it. But the real work? That's just beginning." Daniel reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Then we face it together," he said. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the city streets glimmering in the night. Talia took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. Every ache, every scar, every moment of fear had led her here. And for the first time she realized something profound. Survival wasn't just about escaping danger. It was about embracing who she was, standing tall, and refusing to let anyone dictate her story. Daniel glanced at her, a rare softness in his gaze. "You've changed me," he said. Talia smiled faintly, warmth rising despite the chill. "No," she said. "We've changed each other." They walked down the glimmering street together, shadows blending with light, two people bound not by fear or circumstance but by choice. And for the first time, Talia allowed herself to believe in something she had kept carefully locked away: hope. Because together they had faced darkness, and together they had emerged unbroken. The night stretched ahead, endless and full of possibilities. And as the city hummed around them, Talia knew one truth with absolute certainty. She would never again let anyone, past or present, define the limits of her courage. And neither would Daniel. The storm had passed, but the bond forged in it would last a lifetime.